Protesters across the country have been showing up to Tesla dealerships and showrooms, unhappy with Elon Musk and the government cuts made through the Department of Government Efficiency.
This wasn't supposed to happen to Elon Musk. Billionaires don't get ambushed, but everything unraveled in one brutal move, and no one saw it coming. It didn't start with a lawsuit, a factory collapse, or a product failure. It started with Canada slamming Tesla with a 100% tariff overnight, doubling car prices, erasing sales, and lighting the first match of an economic war. Then they ripped up a $66 million Starlink deal, tossing it in the trash like yesterday's headlines. But that wasn't the real shock. The real story is how this triggered a global revolt. How, one by one, customers, investors, governments, and even Tesla employees turned on Musk. So here's the question. No one's asking, how do you go from building rockets to watching the world burn your empire to the ground? Stick around, because what happens next? It's not business, it's revenge. Why big investors abandoned Musk overnight. Wall Street does not panic easily, but when it does, it moves fast. In the immediate aftermath of Canada's economic strike against Musk, some of the biggest institutional investors in the world started pulling their money out of Tesla and Starlink at an unprecedented rate. This was not a minor sell-off or a normal market correction. It was a coordinated retreat that signaled something far more dangerous. BlackRock, one of the largest asset management companies on the planet, quietly began liquidating its Tesla holdings. Vanguard followed suit, reducing its exposure after years of championing Tesla as the future of transportation. Even more shocking, Elon Musk's own brother, Kimball Musk, sold millions of dollars worth of Tesla shares. Insiders who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Musk were now cashing out before the storm worsened. Why? Because the Canadian tariff and Starlink contract cancellation were not isolated incidents. Wall Street analysts understood what was coming next: a chain reaction of global political retaliation, a crumbling customer base, and an increasingly unstable CEO who had tied himself too closely to political agendas. These investors had seen enough. Tesla's stock price, which had already been reeling, began to free fall. Starlink's valuation dipped further as rumors spread that other governments were considering following Canada's lead. Hedge funds and mutual funds that had once treated Musk like a golden ticket now saw only risk. The signal to smaller investors was clear. If the financial giants were bailing out, everyday shareholders would not stand a chance. Tesla and Starlink shares plummeted further, erasing tens of billions of dollars in market value within weeks. But even as Wall Street ran for the exits, a quieter, more insidious collapse was unfolding behind the scenes, one that most people had not yet noticed. And that's the Starlink's revenue collapse, which we'll talk about right after you hit that subscribe button. Thanks. The hidden financial crisis. No one is watching. While headlines screamed about Tesla's stock crash, few paid attention to what was happening at Starlink until it was too late. The loss of the $66 million Canadian contract was only the first domino to fall. Behind closed doors, governments in Europe, Australia, and parts of Asia quietly began reviewing their own partnerships with Musk's satellite internet venture. For years, Starlink had marketed itself as the future of global internet access, promising to connect underserved populations with high-speed satellite coverage. But after Canada's retaliatory strike, other governments saw an opportunity, or a necessity, to distance themselves from Musk's increasingly controversial empire. Germany, France, and the United Kingdom began halting negotiations for future Starlink infrastructure deals. In Australia, state governments pulled funding for rural internet expansion programs that relied on Starlink satellites. Even emerging markets in Southeast Asia started reconsidering their agreements, fearing political fallout. The financial consequences were devastating. Starlink's projected revenue for the following fiscal year dropped by over 40% in revised forecasts. Existing contracts were either canceled or renegotiated under unfavorable terms. The company's long-term growth model, which depended heavily on government partnerships, was suddenly crumbling. By the time mainstream media caught on, Starlink's financial health was beyond repair. But it was not just satellite contracts that were unraveling. In the wake of these collapses, Tesla itself was bleeding faster than anyone realized. Tesla's cash burn death spiral. While Starlink's revenue collapse went largely unnoticed at first, Tesla's financial freefall was impossible to ignore. Beneath the headlines about stock prices and political retaliation lay a brutal economic reality. Tesla was burning through cash at an unsustainable rate. The reason was simple but catastrophic. In an attempt to offset declining demand, Tesla had slashed vehicle prices across North America, Europe, and Asia. Those aggressive price cuts may have temporarily boosted sales figures, but they came at a steep cost. Profit margins, once the envy of the automotive world, evaporated almost overnight. Worse yet, those discounts did not stop the bleeding. Rising interest rates, new tariffs, and disappearing government incentives meant that even at lower prices, consumers were walking away. Inventory piled up in Tesla showrooms. Production slowed. Suppliers grew restless. At the same time, operational costs were skyrocketing. Legal battles over Tesla's self-driving technology mounted. Labor disputes simmered. Factory expansions in Texas and Germany ran over budget. And Starlink's collapsing revenue meant that Musk could no longer rely on cross-subsidizing Tesla's cash flow. Quarterly reports painted a grim picture. Tesla's once healthy cash reserves were shrinking at an alarming pace. The company had entered a vicious cycle, cutting prices to boost sales, slashing margins in the process, only to face even weaker demand the next quarter. By the end of the fiscal year, Tesla's cash position had fallen below what analysts considered sustainable for an automaker of its scale. Bankruptcy whispers grew louder on Wall Street. But while Tesla's financial collapse was terrifying, it was only the beginning of the storm. Because what came next would not just hit Elon Musk's companies, it would ignite a global revolt against him. Canada's economic war. How Elon became a political target. It started with a decision that shocked the global automotive industry. When the Canadian government announced a 100% tariff on Tesla vehicles and terminated a $66 million Starlink contract, it was clear this wasn't about trade policy. It was political warfare. Canada wasn't just targeting an American company, it was targeting Elon Musk himself. For years, Tesla's rise had symbolized innovation, technological dominance, and a new future for clean transportation. But now Musk had become a pawn in a much larger game of economic retaliation, used by Canadian officials to punch back at the White House's protectionist policies. Behind closed doors, Canadian trade advisors had reportedly framed Tesla's tariff not as a matter of fair competition, but as a deliberate effort to force the American administration to reverse new tariffs on Canadian aluminum and auto parts. Their strategy was simple: hit the most vulnerable billionaire in America's tech economy. Tesla's business model relied heavily on favorable international relations and zero tariff access to key markets. By doubling the price of every Tesla vehicle overnight in Canada, Ottawa effectively erased Tesla's presence from the country, turning the automaker into collateral damage in a much larger diplomatic conflict. The political nature of the attack became even clearer when Canadian leaders publicly called out Musk by name, accusing him of enabling the destruction of our economy due to his close ties with Donald Trump's administration. This wasn't just trade policy. It was a calculated, high-stakes move in the growing political feud between Canada and the United States. But what Canada ignited did not stop at the border. Across the Atlantic, Europe was already preparing its own retaliation, and it would be far more chaotic. Europe's revenge. The anti-Tesla movement goes violent. In the heart of Europe, Tesla was once seen as a symbol of cutting-edge progress. But that image crumbled as Musk's political entanglements spilled into public view. European governments, outraged by Musk's alliance with right-wing politics and frustrated by American trade policies, began dismantling Tesla's standing block by block. Germany and France led the charge. In Berlin, the local government pulled electric vehicle subsidies specifically targeting Tesla buyers, while keeping them intact for European automakers like Volkswagen and Renault. In France, regulators went further, announcing a review of Tesla's safety certifications, effectively freezing new deliveries across major regions. But it wasn't just the politicians turning on Musk. On the streets, anti-Tesla protests exploded into something far more aggressive. Dealerships across France and Germany were vandalized. In one shocking incident near Lyon, masked activists set fire to an entire Tesla showroom, causing millions of dollars in damages. In Berlin, Tesla's Gigafactory faced repeated blockades by labor activists and environmental protesters who now viewed the company not as a savior of clean energy, but as a symbol of American corporate imperialism. Tesla's chargers were defaced. Cybertrucks parked in public were keyed and spray-painted. The message scrawled across the windows of a vandalized Model S in Paris summed up the rage: no billionaires in Europe's future. European political leaders remained largely silent, quietly welcoming the backlash as a convenient way to pressure Musk without direct diplomatic confrontation. And as the protests grew, Tesla's European sales collapsed. But the geopolitical consequences were only beginning, because on the other side of the world, another government had decided to make its move. China closes the door. How Beijing shut out Musk. China has always been Tesla's crown jewel. No market generated more revenue, no factory produced more vehicles than the one in Shanghai. But that era ended brutally when Beijing made it clear that Tesla was no longer welcome. It didn't happen overnight. It began with a quiet shift in policy. Government subsidies that had once fueled Tesla's growth were quietly redirected toward domestic brands like BYD, Xpeng, and NIO. Then came increased regulatory scrutiny. Chinese authorities imposed new safety and data compliance requirements that made it nearly impossible for Tesla to operate freely. But the real blow came from China's Ministry of Commerce, which publicly declared that Tesla would no longer qualify for national procurement contracts or state-backed financing programs. For a company that relied on volume sales and economies of scale, the loss of Chinese government support was catastrophic. Behind the scenes, the Chinese government's motivations were clear. Musk's growing ties to Donald Trump and his vocal criticism of China's tech policies made Tesla a political liability. By turning away from Tesla, Beijing was sending a message to Washington. The age of American tech dominance in China was over. The economic effects were devastating, but this wasn't about financials anymore. It was about power, influence, and national pride. Chinese consumers, long enamored with Tesla's brand, began favoring local alternatives, not because of price or performance, but because owning a Tesla had become politically controversial. But China's move didn't happen in isolation. As Tesla's empire crumbled in North America and Europe, other countries began following suit. The global backlash had reached a point of no return. The anti-Elon domino effect. How Asia and Australia joined the boycott. While Canada fired the first shot and Europe made it violent, the anti-Elon backlash reached full momentum when Asia and Australia joined the campaign. Their actions weren't spontaneous. They were coordinated, calculated, and devastating. In Australia, state governments pulled Tesla from electric vehicle rebate programs, citing Musk's unacceptable political conduct. Provinces removed Tesla chargers from public infrastructure projects. Tesla's sales plummeted by nearly 30% in less than 60 days, the sharpest drop since the company entered the Australian market. South Korea followed. The government revoked Tesla's preferential tax status and announced antitrust investigations into the company's pricing practices. Several major South Korean provinces issued public statements condemning Musk's abuse of market power, urging consumers to seek local electric vehicle alternatives. Even in Southeast Asia, countries like Singapore and Malaysia began canceling infrastructure deals with Starlink and pulling government incentives tied to Tesla vehicles. What made this domino effect so destructive was that none of these governments acted alone. Officials across the Asia-Pacific region coordinated public statements, regulatory measures, and media narratives framing Elon Musk as a dangerous billionaire whose companies no longer deserved public trust. By the time Musk's team realized what was happening, it was too late. This wasn't just an economic crisis. It was a political and social rejection of the Musk brand itself. But as devastating as this global revolt was, the worst was still ahead. Because the next phase of the backlash wouldn't come from governments or protesters, it would come from inside Elon Musk's own empire. The Trump gambit, how Musk's political bet destroyed Tesla's base. Elon Musk once positioned himself as the face of technological progress, a symbol of innovation untainted by political partisanship. But that all changed when he made a gamble that would haunt him, the moment he publicly aligned himself with Donald Trump. For years, Tesla's rise was fueled by environmentally conscious, left-leaning consumers who viewed the brand as a beacon of sustainability and the future. Musk's decision to throw his support behind Trump shattered that image overnight. The damage wasn't abstract. It was cultural, personal, and financial. Progressive customers, once proud to own a Tesla, suddenly saw the brand as a badge of division. In coastal American cities where Tesla sales once flourished, buyers began canceling orders and trading in their vehicles, not because of price, but because of politics. European consumers, long sensitive to far-right affiliations, reacted even more strongly. Sales plummeted across Germany, France, and the Netherlands as Tesla's brand became a lightning rod for controversy. What made Musk's Trump endorsement so destructive wasn't just the political association, it was the hypocrisy. Tesla had built its empire on promises of a green global future, yet its founder was now aligning himself with an administration that rolled back environmental protections and dismantled climate policies. That contradiction proved unforgivable to Tesla's base. Musk's personal brand had infected his companies, and Tesla's identity crisis was now unavoidable. But this political gamble wasn't the only self-inflicted wound Musk delivered. As the public outcry grew louder, another scandal was quietly unraveling behind the scenes, one that threatened to land Tesla in far deeper trouble. Now we'll talk about the details, but have you subscribed to our channel yet? It's easy. Just hit the button. The self-driving fraud, why Tesla is now facing criminal investigations. While Musk's political gambit alienated customers, it was his broken promises about Tesla's self-driving technology that invited government scrutiny and legal disaster. For nearly a decade, Musk had told the world that full autonomy was just around the corner, that Tesla vehicles would soon drive themselves with no human intervention. He claimed Tesla owners would one day make money by turning their cars into self-driving taxis while they slept. But that dream never materialized. Instead, crash after crash exposed the truth. Tesla's so-called full self-driving system was fundamentally flawed and dangerously overhyped. Federal regulators from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration launched investigations as fatalities involving Tesla's autopilot mode mounted. Lawsuits followed. Families of victims accused Tesla of deceptive marketing, arguing that the company knowingly exaggerated the system's capabilities, placing drivers and pedestrians at risk. The most damning evidence came in the form of internal emails and whistleblower reports, suggesting Tesla's engineers had warned Musk repeatedly about the limitations of the technology. But Musk pushed forward, downplaying concerns and insisting self-driving was just a software update away. That reckless approach has now triggered a Department of Justice probe into whether Tesla committed consumer fraud. This wasn't just a corporate scandal, it was personal. Musk had tethered Tesla's future and its stock price to the promise of self-driving dominance. As lawsuits piled up and investigations deepened, investors began to see those promises as empty. But even as the legal noose tightened, another product failure was making Tesla a laughingstock in the very market it once ruled. The Cybertruck disaster, Tesla's last bet, turned into a national joke. If there was ever a product that symbolized the unraveling of Elon Musk's empire, it was the Cybertruck. When it was first announced, the Cybertruck was marketed as Tesla's next revolution, a bold, unbreakable electric truck that would redefine the market. Instead, it became a national joke. The Cybertruck's rollout was plagued by design flaws, production delays, and safety concerns. Its polarizing angular bodywork looked more like a video game prop than a practical vehicle. Crash tests revealed structural vulnerabilities, and early buyers complained about software glitches, steering issues, and absurdly high prices. What was supposed to be the savior of Tesla's product line turned into an expensive, embarrassing spectacle. The real damage, however, was cultural. Tesla's loyal customers had once identified with sleek, forward-thinking vehicles. The Cybertruck's dystopian aesthetic and impractical design alienated them. In the eyes of many, it was no longer a Tesla. It was Elon's personal vanity project. Worse, it reinforced the growing narrative that Tesla had lost its edge, choosing shock value over substance. Competitors wasted no time capitalizing on the fiasco. Legacy automakers and upstarts alike rolled out electric trucks that were safer, cheaper, and better looking. As pre-orders dried up and resale values cratered, the Cybertruck became a cautionary tale of hubris and poor leadership. But the disaster didn't stop at the product level. Inside Tesla's factories and boardrooms, another revolt was quietly brewing, the employee revolt. How Elon lost the workforce that built his empire. Elon Musk's empire wasn't just collapsing in public, it was falling apart from within. As Tesla's stock crashed and protests erupted outside showrooms, another crisis was unfolding behind closed doors. The very workforce that had built Tesla and Starlink was now turning against their billionaire boss. In the past, Tesla employees had tolerated long hours, low wages, and punishing demands in exchange for a sense of mission. Musk's vision kept them motivated, believing they were part of something bigger. But as the controversies mounted and the financial incentives evaporated, that loyalty crumbled. Mass layoffs slashed nearly 15% of Tesla's global workforce. Engineers, designers, and production workers found themselves jobless, while executives dumped their stock options. Those who remained described a toxic environment of overwork, surveillance, and plummeting morale. Glassdoor reviews painted a grim picture. Tesla had become a pressure cooker, its workers burning out as Musk became increasingly distracted by politics, social media feuds, and other ventures, competitors pounced. Rivian, Lucid, and BYD actively recruited Tesla's displaced talent, offering better pay, stable leadership, and a vision untainted by controversy. The exodus wasn't just a labor problem, it was an intellectual drain. Tesla's most innovative minds were now building vehicles for its rivals, and the consequences were immediate. Production delays worsened, software updates failed, quality control collapsed. Musk's empire wasn't just losing customers and investors, it was losing the people who made the company possible in the first place. But even as Tesla and Starlink crumbled from within, the fallout didn't stop there, because what happened next wouldn't just reshape Elon's companies, it would reshape the entire industry. Rivals take over. How Tesla's collapse crowned new kings. Tesla's collapse did not leave behind an empty space. It created a vacuum. And in industries as ruthless as electric vehicles and satellite networks, vacuums never last long. Within weeks of Tesla and Starlink's implosion, the wolves closed in. This wasn't a slow, respectful takeover. It was a feeding frenzy. In the electric vehicle market, companies like Build Your Dreams, Rivian Automotive, Lucid Motors, General Motors, and Ford Motor Company seized the moment with ruthless efficiency. They had been preparing for this collapse quietly, biding their time as Musk's empire unraveled. When the chaos exploded, they flooded the market with vehicles that were not just cheaper, but smarter, safer, and easier to trust. Consumers who once waited in line for the next Tesla release now lined up to buy electric vehicles from brands they no longer associated with political controversy or broken promises. But the takeover extended far beyond cars. In the satellite sector, the fall of Space Exploration Technologies Corporation created immediate chaos and opportunity. For years, Starlink's satellite internet service had been the only game in town for remote regions across North America, Europe, and beyond. That monopoly evaporated overnight. European and Canadian telecom companies pounced, launching regional satellite networks, promising what Musk's empire had lost: political neutrality, regulatory transparency, and reliability. For decades, Musk's companies had built their power on being disruptive, but now they were the ones being disrupted, and there was no coming back. And while corporate rivals devoured Tesla's market share, another revolution was building from the ground up: the Union Rebellion. How Elon's downfall empowered labor movements. When Tesla's empire crumbled, the shockwaves did not stop at Wall Street. They spread to the factory floors, the assembly lines, and the engineering offices. Because for years, Tesla's workforce had labored under crushing conditions: long hours, union-busting policies, and leadership that demanded total loyalty without accountability. And when the empire finally fell, the workers fought back. Across the United States and Europe, labor unions seized an opening they had been denied for years. No longer afraid of Musk's influence, workers at Tesla's former factories and Starlink's ground stations organized. They launched strikes, filed lawsuits, and negotiated new contracts that reshaped labor rights across the entire technology and manufacturing sectors. In the United States, new legislation protecting unionization efforts in the electric vehicle and satellite industries passed for the first time in decades. In Europe, collective bargaining agreements forced automakers and telecom firms to raise wages and guarantee job security for thousands of workers. Even beyond Tesla and Starlink, the rebellion spread. Workers at other tech giants, inspired by Musk's downfall, began pushing for their own protections. The message was clear: never again would one man's ambition override the rights of the people who built his empire. But as labor gained power, customers were making their own decision, a decision that sealed the fate of Musk's brands. The consumer exodus: why buyers abandoned Musk forever. Tesla and Starlink's collapse was not just financial or political, it was cultural. The customers who once worshipped Musk's vision did not walk away because of product recalls or technical failures. They walked away because of betrayal. For years, Tesla had been more than a car company. It had been a movement. Starlink had been more than an internet provider. It had been a symbol of freedom from corporate monopolies. But as Musk's controversies piled up, his politics, his scandals, his reckless behavior, the dream turned toxic. The exodus did not happen overnight. It was not loud or dramatic. It happened quietly, relentlessly. Tesla owners stopped recommending the brand to friends. They peeled logos off their vehicles to avoid being associated with Musk. Starlink users canceled subscriptions, not because of price hikes, but because of what the company represented. Surveys confirmed the trend. Among younger, environmentally conscious consumers, the very demographic that once defined Tesla's rise, trust in the brand collapsed. And once that trust was broken, no amount of price cuts, marketing campaigns, or product updates could fix it. The exodus was permanent. With customers gone, workers empowered, and rivals ascended, only one question remained: could anything be salvaged? The end of the empire. Will Tesla and Starlink survive? As the dust settled, Tesla and Starlink stood on the edge of extinction. Their collapse was no longer hypothetical. It was real, visible, and irreversible. Analysts across the globe issued dire warnings. Without government subsidies, without loyal customers, and without Elon Musk's personal brand appeal, both companies faced shrinking revenues, mounting debts, and plummeting relevance. They had once thrived on innovation and disruption. Now they were being outpaced by competitors who had learned from Musk's mistakes and moved faster, leaner, and smarter. Build Your Dreams and Rivian Automotive no longer trailed Tesla. They led. General Motors and Ford Motor Company, once dismissed as dinosaurs, had reinvented themselves as the backbone of American electric vehicles. In Europe and Canada, new satellite networks offered faster, safer, and politically neutral services, leaving Starlink scrambling to stay relevant. Internally, both companies faced hollowed-out workforces, deteriorating infrastructure, and crumbling leadership. The empire that Musk built had been fueled by ambition, disruption, and personality. But in the end, it was undone by those very things. The final blow came not from regulators, rivals, or labor unions, but from the market itself. Customers had moved on, investors had moved on, the world had moved on. Tesla and Starlink had become relics of a different era, a cautionary tale of how ambition without accountability and power without responsibility always leads to collapse. And as the industry reshaped itself in their absence, one thing became clear: the future no longer belonged to Elon Musk. But what's your opinion on this? What's going to happen to one of the world's richest men? Let's talk in the comments.